so often God knows the things on our hearts well before we do.
Yes.
So I'm grateful for that last song, that it won't always be like this. I don't know if that day is tomorrow, but it won't always be like this. Last weekend I was out of town, and when I drove back into Nashville, before you got to the places where the houses ought to have been, the first thing that I noticed were the trees. Not the ones that were uprooted, cut up, tossed kind of off the road, but the ones whose roots were still under the ground, who somehow survived one of the most violent kinds of storms. You know, we don't name tornadoes. And I was reading all about that this week and why we don't name storms that uproot people's lives, storms that we will always remember. And they were saying it's because we can't predict them the way that we can track hurricanes as they move across the ocean. That so often we see these massive cells and we think it's going to dip down and then it doesn't. Or it does, and before the sirens even go off, it's back up in the clouds again. And so I noticed these trees who have survived this most violent kind of storm, and they were leaning in multiple directions, tall trees, some of them with green still on their branches, disfigured. And though these roads are now again busy, many of the roadblocks are now gone, these trees have not yet returned to their upright form. They are not ready to return to a new way of being. Not yet ready to stand pointing toward the sun so that they can receive all of the goodness that the earth has for them.
That's good, Aaron.
I say it's a new way of being because even though the bark bears no scars, the trees were harmed too. Amen. Their rings, one day when they're cut, will show that this happened during the life of a tree. My mother taught me that when you cut open a tree, you can see the years that there was a lot of water. The years where it had good growth. And when the rings are close together, it means that there was not enough water that year. Or it did not get what it needed. And yet, it survived because there's yet another ring. And so one day, the rings will show what happened in the tree. But for today, the trees need to stay linked just a little while longer. And I was reminded that even in Jerusalem, in the midst of war and peacetime and illness, the wailing woman met at the wall. That these were professional mourners, skilled mothers and daughters who trained for this. Their job was to wail, to lead the community in the rituals of grief, whether in response to national tragedy or death in the community. Their job, their only job, was to show us how to lament.
That's it. That's good.
And perhaps you've heard them before. Their knees pressed into the mourner's bench, wells of pain and anguish and love and terror, and perhaps they've given you permission to express your own wells of grief and anguish and love and terror. And perhaps it makes us uncomfortable. Our sanitized shop keeps our bodies from participating. But beloved, these are no ordinary times. These past days and weeks have been inundating. The coming days and weeks seem foreboding, uncertain. And so I ask you today, when was the last time that you wailed?
That's good.
Not wailed because of a season of grief, but wailed because something is wrong with the earth. Wailed because something is structurally not right. Wailed because before you go back to your regular life, something is not right. When was the last time that you wailed? And I invite you to ponder this question as we look at today's text. It comes from Judges 19, which is on page 206 in your Pew Bible. We'll Lysol it after. And I'm reading from the NRSV. In those days, Israel had no king. Now a Levite who lived in a remote area of the hill country of Ephraim took a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. But she was unfaithful to him. She left him and went back to her parents' home in Bethlehem, Judah. After she had been there for 4 months, her husband went to her to persuade her to return. He had with him his servant and 2 donkeys. She took him into her parents' home, and when her father saw him, he gladly welcomed him. His father-in-law, the woman's father, prevailed on him to stay, so he remained with him for 3 days, eating and drinking and sleeping there. I'm skipping down to verse 20. And so they have left her parents' house, and they have traveled to Gibeah in Benjamin, where they're going to spend the night. The old man greets them in the village square after no one has agreed to take them in, and he says, "You are welcome at my house." The old man said, "Let me supply you with whatever you need. Only don't spend the night in the square." So he took him into his house and fed his donkeys. After they had washed their feet, they had something to eat and drink. While they were enjoying themselves, some of the wicked men of the city surrounded the house. Pounding on the door, they shouted to the old man who owned the home, "Bring out the man who came to your house so we can have sex with him." The owner of the house went outside and said to them, "No, my friends, don't be so vile. Since this man is my guest, don't do this outrageous thing. Look, here is my virgin daughter and his concubine. I will bring them out to you now, and you can use them and do whatever to them that you wish. But as for this man, do not do this outrageous thing." But the men would not listen to him, and so the man took his concubine and set her outside to them, and they raped her and abused her throughout the night. And at dawn they let her go. At daybreak, the woman went back to the house where her master was staying, fell down at the door, and lay there until daylight. When her master got up in the morning and opened the door to the house, we're almost done, I promise, he stepped out to continue on his way. And there lay his concubine, fallen in the doorway of the house, her hands on the threshold. He said to her, "Get up, let's go." But there was no answer. And then the man put her on his donkey and set out for home. When he reached home, he took a knife and set up his concubine, limb by limb, into 12 parts and sent them to all the areas of Israel. Everyone who saw it was saying to one another, "Such a thing has never been seen or done, not since the day that the Israelites came out of Egypt." Just imagine. Will you pray with me? God, you made these texts far better than we will ever know them ourselves.
Oh, yes.
Tuck me behind your wings. Say to us the words that you want to hear. Let us not hear the ones that are not for us. We thank you that you are with us. We thank you that you are over us. That you tuck us under and you give us permission to lament. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
In the wake of the storm, I wondered if it was too soon to revisit this text. In the wake of the storm, I wondered if we really needed to hear this word on this day. In the wake of the storm, I said, Lord, how much more can your people take? And the Spirit of God convicted me, saying that we know that evil does not wait for us to be rested up, renewed, and restored. That the evil one is not concerned about our well-being, about our readiness, and that if we waited, we would fail to be accountable to the women that we love, to those whose stories bring us to this place. That in the midst of crisis and disaster and social distancing, their lives are most at peril.
That's it.
That the violence against their flesh and spirits and minds increases as they are cut off from the places that are safe, as the places that are safe are damaged, as social distancing does not cause anyone to question where they are and how they are doing. And so I invite you to bear witness to this story once again. You may have heard it preach about hospitality. You may have heard it preach about sexuality, which is not what this text is really about. You may have heard it preached 1,000 ways. But I contend to you today that this text is about a woman and a storm. She's not given a name in this text, but we know her story. It's the story of a young black doctor killed by her partner in a hospital in Chicago. So we call her Tamara. It is the story of thousands of missing indigenous women. And so we call her Selena Not Afraid and Kaya Sarah Stops Pretty Places. It is the story of Latinx women who have sojourned to the United States only to be violated in holding cells and sent back to the places they fled to die. So we call her Irma. It is the story of the trans woman who was beaten by a mob, blamed for her own death, and so we call her Keisha. Whichever name she is to you, beloved, I'm sure that you have met her at some point on your journey. Perhaps parts of her story mirror your own. These stories, they overlap and overlay. Their resonance is a resounding echo that something is deeply wrong. It is a lament. God, my God, where were you? When will this storm end? Where were you? And beloved, lament is holy because we do it in the presence of God. I don't think you heard me that lament is holy. Amen. Because we do it in the presence of God. In that way, it is different from grief because we can do grief apart. Right. But when we lament, we step in to the veil. And so today, I'd like to give her another name. I'd like to call her North Nashville.
That's it.
But if I do that, siblings, you've got to hold with me that this story is also flesh and blood.
Yes.
That this story is a whole person, whole people's lives. That mangled flesh is never a metaphor. But the city of Nashville made North its concubine. Treated her and her people like second-class citizens. She had to participate in the marriage rites, but was not allowed to pursue life on her own terms. Many biblical scholars note that to commit adultery in this text does not mean that she violated the covenant of her marriage, which had been established by her father and her husband. Rather, it can mean that she decided to deny access to her body. It can mean that she said, this isn't really working for me. It can mean that she decided to leave. So North did as well. She built her own institutions and schools, barbershops and hair salons, banks and commerce, theaters and music venues, houses of worship and altars. She was sheltered from the abuse of Jim Crow. She established her own sacred meetings. The city, however, had other plans for her. Tracing the contours of her bounty, he redlined, marking her as unworthy of public investment, as less qualified for city resources, and left out of the decision making. Because she's a concubine, the second-class wife. And when it came time to build a highway connecting Memphis to Nashville, the Levite took north, severing her into pieces, rearranging her parts so that he could ride into the road. It was an intentional disembowelment. And we've seen echoes of this dismembering this past week. Fancy cars masquerading as offers of help, predatory lending and lowball bids, damage from the storm. Swarms of volunteers doing necessary work are often also reminders of how the neighborhood and the city have changed.
That's right.
They traffic in the trauma. The text says that the concubine, and I'm in verse 25 if you're following along, having been raped and abused throughout the night, was released from the mob at daybreak, where she stumbled to the threshold of the door. There she fell. The author, in the Hebrew syntax of the story, repeats the daylight motif 4 times. He says, at dawn they let her go. At daybreak, the woman went back to the house where her master was staying, fell down at the door, and lay there until daylight. When her master got up in the morning, you see, daylight is important. It gives us time to determine what has happened. It allows us to see the true damage of a storm. Daylight, beloved, makes things plain. In a world without electricities or friends who have generators, daylight, for the ancients and for us, can mean life or death. In our world where many of us were without power for over a week, daylight was welcome relief. And the promise to the Hebrew people was that God would help them at break of day. But break of day comes, and there is no help. Continuing on in verse 27, it says, he opened the door of the house and stepped out to continue on his way. And there lay his concubine, fallen in the doorway of the house with her hands on the threshold. He said to her, get up, let's go. But there was no answer because she is dead. And she is not just dead, she is gang raped, abused, mutilated. Her body becomes a memorial to the terror that it has seen. Maybe, as many of us emerged from bathrooms and rubbles last week, it seems like God was too late. It seems like all of the memories, all of the terror of the night came rushing back. For those of you who lived in Nashville much longer than I, it echoed the fear of the '98 tornado. The desperation of the waters that kept rising in 2010, the help that never seemed to come. When people received the severed limbs, the mutilated flesh, they said, such a thing has never happened. They had chosen not to see the dismemberment that previously had happened in their midst. They've not recognized the memorials, the bodies that had endured unwanted hands, second-class treatment, invasions of privacy, ignored no's. They had not seen the concubine as flesh and blood, as mind and spirit, as image of God. And there are memorials all around us. Folks who've been silenced, children who've been told they don't know what they speak of, bodies that remember the nights before dawn arrived. Such a thing has happened here before. And so the Levite takes the plot of land, he cuts it up and builds 2 revitalized tall and skinnies. And the people go to war against the Benjaminites, and they rape 400 more women.
Say it.
They did not listen for the howls. They did not stop to grieve. For them, North's life was ungrievable because it was never considered a life at all.
That's right.
Yeah.
The poet Hanif Adiraki put it this way: the only difference between sunsets and funerals is whether or not a town mistakes the howls of a woman for madness.
My God.
Let me say that again, that the only difference between sunsets and funerals is whether or not a town mistakes the howls of a woman for madness. And a howl is visceral, it's beneath the conscious level, it's a well of pain and love and rage and terror that just doesn't have no more. It is the wail. I imagine that her howls were met with echoing silence. Too often when folk howl about their pain, their howls become muted.
Yes.
We call them personality disorders. We institutionalize folks. Whether it's psychiatric hospitals or jail cells, our culture has a disdain for public grief.
Yes.
But to name violence, my friends,
Name it.
is to sit with the weight of mangled flesh.
That's it.
It is to sit with the howl that it makes. It is to wail about the house that is no more.
Yes.
It is to grieve the harm that has been done.
Yes.
It is a lament. And when we fail to grieve, this is what I love, is that when we fail to grieve, our brains are literally unable to process the trauma that our bodies have endured.
Not all.
We get stuck in what psychiatrists call amplification, where we are always afraid of what is around the next corner, where we don't know what's coming next, where we are constantly in this loop of this is what happened to me. The memories literally stay fragmented, disconnected inside of our bodies and our minds. Lament, the process of bringing our grief, our anguish, our howls, our terror, our love, our pain before God, reconfigures those memories. It releases the stress that never was meant to be held in the body. It is holy permission to express our anger and our disbelief. This is what the wailing women knew. That the survival of their community depended on their capacity to lament. On the ways in which they invited God in and bore witness to each other. On the ways in which they said, God, you are still good, but I don't see it right now. I know that you said you were here, but I don't see it right now. I know you say it gets better soon, but I don't see it right now. They knew that the promise of joy only comes after the MOUR ending. Not the other kind. And so, beloved, the word from the Lord today is a call to lament.
Yes.
Lament, because our mental health depends on it.
Yes.
Lament, because there is something deeply wrong.
Yes.
Lament, because our bodies depend on it. Lament, because there is something deeply wrong. Lament, because it is an example to our children. Lament, because there is something deeply wrong. Lament, because the survival of our community depends on it. Lament, because there is something deeply wrong. My friends, there is still so much to do, from disaster relief to advocacy. It still feels like too soon to talk about resurrection, though we know that it comes. But God sits with us. The Spirit making sense of our grief, turning our wails and our howls into petition. You have permission today to wail.
Yeah.
The trees, they're still weeping. This Lenten season, it seems that the whole earth joins in our lament. May it be holy, and may it be so.
Hallelujah.